This program is brought to you by thepodcastfactory.com.
Hi, my name is Igor Kheifets, and this is The List Building Lifestyle, the only podcast which delivers cutting-edge conversion strategies from the online trenches straight to your earbuds. Download the transcript of today's episode and all future episodes at listbuildinglifestyleshow.com. I also invite you to grab a free copy of the Wealthy List Builder Survival Guide at listbuildinglifestyleshow.com/survival. And now, once again, it's time to claim your list building lifestyle. Welcome back to another edition of the List Building Lifestyle with your host, Igor Kheifets. Chris Voss is the founder and the CEO of the Black Swan Group and author of Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as if your life depended on it. Chris was the lead international kidnapping negotiator for the FBI. Chris takes 24 years of intense real-world negotiating experience to everyday life. He teaches people how to negotiate as if their life depended on it, be it your next sale or getting your daughter to unlock her room and go to school. I'm an avid student of hardcore negotiation because I believe it to be the essential skill for any marketer, business person, and father, which I turned a couple of years ago. So I read Never Split the Difference. I put it down. I picked it up and read it again, this time with a yellow marker and a notepad. I immediately got a copy for each of my team members and forced them to read it too. As a result, our sales are up, our customer support satisfaction levels are up, and I actually win one of every 3 arguments I have with my wife, which is why I'm excited to be hosting you today, Chris.
It's a pleasure to be here. It sounds like you really have taken this to the next level. I'm very flattered.
Oh, yeah. I'm like I said before the interview, I'm a huge fanboy, and I've applied many of the lessons. I'm sure not all, right? But many of the lessons from Never Split the Difference to not only my business, but also my personal life. And I got to tell you, it's much easier to communicate with my wife at this point, just have a normal conversation without it ending up in a fight. So I'm really grateful for that. Now, in your book, one of the first things you mentioned, one of the first big ideas that you kind of challenge the reader with is that negotiations are not logical, which I find to be interesting because most people I work with and most people who kind of get into the business of selling and marketing, which is the business we're in, the initial response is to try and sell them logic, is to give them the best benefits. It's to show how the offer is awesome, how it's a no-brainer, but oftentimes it just doesn't work. So I would love it if you could share with us, why do you believe negotiations are not logical, and what are they?
Well, we make decisions based on what we care about, and care, if you will, that makes, in fact, decision an emotional process. Emotions, passions are brought into our decision making. It's like it's a component of a DNA chain. No matter how much you try to eliminate emotions, it's going to be part of that component, whether it's big or it's small, any given decision. I love talking with you just in that there's a tremendous influence in my thinking in the book and the whole negotiation style from a couple of Israeli psychologists, Danny Kahneman, and I got a mental block on his Amos Tversky. And, they talked about how do people react. And I was looking at, and when I stumbled across their work, I thought, that's what hostage negotiators are doing. They're articulating what hostage negotiators have taken into account. It's not just under stress, it's everywhere. Because, each decision is either more or less intense moment of stress. So let's talk about how people actually react, and let's go with it and make it work for us, as opposed to struggling and trying to pretend that there's logic and there's reason. Logic is a little butterfly floating in the breeze. It just doesn't exist.
Interesting. So, in other words, you've seen a challenge, right? The big challenge which you spotted when you became a part of the negotiation team for the FBI. Everybody was getting the same textbook advice. And then you said, we can't go on ignoring the fact, which is nobody in this room has ever encountered a negotiation situation which was not highly emotional.
Exactly. And I can remember, if you will, the poster child for logical, reason-based negotiations is the book Getting to Yes, which is an intellectually sound book. And as I was training hostage negotiators, not when I became one, but I was training one, I used to get them all getting to yes. And they would read the book and they would say, this makes sense. And not one of them got any better as a result of it. Not one of them was ever able to actually apply it. so this is what we got. Let's make this work. And then, like I said, I started applying my business and personal life, brought my batting average. I think maybe, with the women who've been in my life, it brought me up to about winning about one in three arguments, like you said.
That's the average for guys, right? Even skilled negotiators.
Yeah, I think I'm almost getting to your level on that. So I think, I may need to take a look at your notes on my book, see what I've missed.
All right. Well, all right, Chris. So our audience is mostly people who are members of business opportunities, people who are trying to make it, who are trying to build a lifestyle business. So if you perhaps read a copy, the 4-Hour Workweek, if you heard about that book, that's really the ideal lifestyle that our audience wants to live. And the way they want to get there is by promoting business opportunities and helping other people get rich. And so one of the situations they encounter constantly is they introduce their business opportunity, which to them seems like the most amazing thing since the microwave, to other people, and all they get is just rejection, some more rejection. So can you perhaps suggest a couple of, behaviors or habits or just, actions we can take in order to get either less rejection or to get more, compliance from the prospect?
All right. So counterintuitively, ask someone, why would you ever change from what you're doing now? Because you're trying to get them to change. Now, the word why provokes defensiveness. Why is a surgical strike. You should never ask why unless you want them to defend a position you like. And what it does in a very non-threatening way, it sort of wakes them up and makes them think, well, why would I change? And since you asked why, they're going to defend the idea of change. So you've opened their mind in a way that they didn't realize that you did it. Because you're a lifestyle change. Why would you ever do that? Well, I would do that because reason, whatever it is. Now, they probably just listed reasons that you want to pitch them. But of course, if it comes out of their mouth, those reasons now make sense, as opposed to you trying to sell those reasons to them. If they said it, it must be true. And that begins to trigger the process of the circuitous route, the delay that saves time. The straightest distance between 2 points in a negotiation is not a straight line. Straightest distance in agreement, it's little side trips to understand what is important to people. The other thing it does is, if you ask them why would they ever switch away from the status quo, what they're doing now, it also begins to give you a look at the profile of how they think, what matters to them, instead of you speculating. And that's a hostage negotiator's trick. I mean, we know that I learned around the world, every culture on the planet is a hostage negotiator. First of all, every hostage negotiation team, whether in Israel, New Jersey, Tokyo, or Cape Town, South Africa, all use the same 8 skills because we're all human beings. It's human-based negotiation. It's more than cross-cultural. It's subcultural. It goes under culture. We were human beings before we were Americans, before we were Israelis, before we were Africans. We're human beings first. And then in using these 9 skills, in every culture on the planet, I know how every person on the planet reacts. And I know because I've been on every culture. And hostage negotiators found out the hard way that when you ask someone why, it triggers defensiveness, usually makes them angry. We used to say never use why. Now we say sometimes use why, rarely, occasionally, surgical strike. And which is when the defensiveness, it makes them defend you. Why would you do what I want you to do? Is what you're really asking, but you're putting it in another way, which preserves their freedom and their autonomy. And that's how you open up the lifestyle change approach.
Interesting. So what I'm hearing is we must ask questions and not pitch them.
It's a combination of, why. First of all, why do you ask a question? You ask a question because you're trying to gather information. I'd reframe it a little bit more like that, but I would definitely say you're not pitching them. You're not pitching a game. My heroes, Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and the prospect theory says that people are more likely to make a change in order to avoid a loss as opposed to make a change to accomplish a gain. And they said that avoiding losses are worth no less than double what achieving gains are. So it'd be like if you were playing a game and you had a choice to take one strategy that was worth no less than double what the other strategy was. You would, if you became a master of the game, go after the high-value strategies. So pitching, avoiding a loss, making them see avoiding a loss is more powerful than accomplishing a gain. And most sales try to deal with only gain, and they don't understand how maybe the strategy is actually avoiding some other kind of a loss. It's very counterintuitive, And that's why only the best people know how to do it. That's how the A players, the A plus players understand. And there's other school of thought that said a loss is worth 3 times a gain. And yet even another school of thought that says a loss is worth 9 times a gain. And so if you understand how to reframe, doing this will stop you from losing that. You now have anywhere from 2 to 9x points with that. And that's more powerful than pitching gain.
Well, I just want to make sure we haven't lost anybody, because that was a really big, really profound concept that you just shared with us. So first off, the concept of fearing a loss being more powerful than wanting a gain is called loss aversion. And it tells us that people will do almost anything to avoid losing $100, but they will do very little to gain $1,000, right? So that's
they'll do half as much.
Yeah. So now our job then, as somebody who's a part of a business opportunity, whose income relies on getting other people into this business opportunity, we now first, before we can pitch anything, whether, with benefit or gain or some loss, we have to identify exactly what these concepts mean to the person we're talking to, which means our job, if we are to be effective in that sales conversation, is to ask questions that will allow us to understand what that loss, that precious thing that they're afraid to lose, right, means to them.
Yes.
And leverage that ammo, if you will, to guide them on making the buying decision.
And here's the other pivot I'd like to see your listeners understand also, because you make a great point, and I'm going to make a distinction. You're trying to gather information. Now, about half the time, asking questions is the best way to gather information, but it's an information gathering strategy. About the other half of the time, asking a question is not the best way to gather the information, which seems really counterintuitive, but instead you make an observation. And we happen to call these, in my business system, a label. And instead of saying, what's important to you, you do a little bit of a cold read. You'll say, well, it seems like XYZ is important to you. The second one, the label, the observation, about half the time is the best way to gather more information. So you've got to gain your feel for the person and the situation, whether you're going to trigger that information by asking a question, what's important to you, or by saying, well, it seems like being able to make your own schedule is important to you. Particularly say it's a benefit of what you're talking about, what you're trying to sell. You say it seems like benefit A is important to you. Now, they'll answer that either affirmatively or negatively. If they say no, here's a crazy idea. When they say no, they'll say more. They'll say no and. They might even say yes and. What you're driving at in sales is getting at the and, which is why you want to get out of a straight yes-no conversation. That's a problem with closed-ended questions. They drive for simply a simple yes or a simple no. And we never want either. We want yes and, we want no and. The no and tends to be much longer than the yes and. And that's why the no and is a great response to an observation. No, I don't want that. That doesn't matter to me at all. What I want is this. And bang, 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 you've got solid gold information.
Interesting. So, and this is really counterintuitive, right? Because most people, just like you mentioned earlier, they are conditioned to seek out that yes. Even I believe there's this strategy in sales where you're told, get your prospect saying yes just about anything, really. It's like, is your name John? Yes. Do you poop when you wake up in the morning? Yes. Do you like the idea of making a lot of money? Yes. And so you kind of get them into a habit of a yes. And so now you're saying that, no, we don't necessarily want that. We want the no. So that will spark them giving us way more information, which we can then use to build a if you will, a profile, right? And then leverage that data in order to get them moving forward by being able to show them that moving forward is within their own interest.
The point that you just made indirectly was everyone's sales training is to get them saying yes. And there was a time when that was an effective strategy. Let me draw the analogy to medication against a disease. What happens when you use the same approach on a disease, when you use the same medicine over and over and over and over and over again? The medicine is no longer effective because they built up a resistance to it. And actually, that's a lot of doctors around the world have caused very specific types of medications that they prescribe to every disease for children, and those medications no longer work. The yes medication no longer works. The people around the world have built up a resistance to it. It's less effective than it ever was. And that's why getting out of it is stop using a medication. It's no longer effective.
Wow. So the yes medication doesn't work. I actually know that that you can't use the same medication over and over again, but it explains why I had to change my exercise regimen about 6 times now in the last 6 months for my lower back issues. And every time I did, it just got a little better. So, well, thank you for that. That was a pretty cool, side effect of this interview. So now the other thing you mentioned in the book, again, guys, this book has so many insights, you absolutely have to grab it, by the way, if you still haven't got the idea. But the other thing you mentioned in the book is that there's no such thing as fair. So in other words, when you're trying to, build a deal or get to that win-win situation that's supposedly fair, that's also not the right approach towards negotiation.
Right. We actually call fair the F word. Or we say, somebody dropped the F-bomb in the conversation when they drop the word fair. I mean, it is so ridiculously emotional and it's so insidious. And fair comes up in every negotiation and it always knocks people off their game. And, what it is it's a sign of frustration. And, really assertive attacking negotiators love to use it all the time against us. And who is the world champion of using that word now? Who would you imagine launches it on a regular basis to push people around and trigger an unconscious reaction? I bet he does it at least once a day, if not 4 to 5 times a day.
Trump,
Donald Trump, exactly right. Every time he's got a complaint against someone, he tweets out, they did this, they did this, they did this. Very unfair. And look at the subtle effect it's having. He's got and maintains on a regular basis the world's attention. Nobody's pushing back on his use of the F-bomb. He uses it all the time. Why does a guy like Trump use it? Because it works. So, and there's no such thing as fair. I mean, what's fair about anything? It's like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. So it's something for people to really watch out for. And that's why we call it the F word, because it gets so much attention and it's such a fiction.
You just mentioned something just as if it's a common sense thing. However, I believe that the concept of accepting the idea that fair is subjective, that the situation will always be different in the eyes of different people. I think that's a big concept we should invest a little bit of time discussing, because after connecting with my customers for the last 8 years, I clearly can tell that very few people understand that fairness is a relative concept. So can you share with us perhaps either an example of your career or maybe a story that really allows us to understand why being fair is not helping anyone?
Right, and a misunderstanding of the term. So there was one of my instructors from Harvard, who's an extraordinary woman. She was talking about the sale of her home a number of years ago. And they wanted to sell their home, move out of the city, move out into the country, to have a beautiful place for the children. They had a wonderful vision, and they ultimately accomplished it. Have a phenomenal place for the kids to grow up. Now, where they were living in Boston, the economy had shifted, and the real estate market had dipped. It had dropped. External circumstances. So they had a buyer that was getting ready to buy the house to help them accomplish their dream, but the market had dropped, and the buyer came in at a price that was much lower than the house had been worth just a year earlier. And in that negotiation with the buyer, she inadvertently, and this is how a good person, a good, decent, honest, and there's no one that has more integrity than this person I'm talking about. She's my hero in terms of her integrity and her genuineness. She said, "We just want what's fair." And the buyer raised their price. Now, how is that fair to the buyer? They get no control over what happened in the real estate market. They're bidding based on what's happening in the market. The market dropped. And how is it fair to them to have to raise the price? Because they've got their own hopes and dreams in their life too. They're approaching the same moment in time from a very different approach. Maybe they hope for this marvelous house in Boston where they can start their life over. They've got their own hopes and dreams also, but somehow them accomplishing their hopes and dreams is unfair for somebody else at the same intersection. It's this emotional reaction. And you know what? They raised the price and they sold the house at a much higher price. And that really got me thinking about the F word, if you will, because it can come up from a counterpart who is not trying to hurt us personally. They just blurt it out, but it still has this incredibly unfair effect on the other side. It makes people feel accused. It makes them feel like they're doing something wrong. It appeals to a sense of justice that we have, all of us have, in some way or another. And the other thing it does is it hides weakness. When she said we just want what's fair, is she felt out of control. She felt like she couldn't do anything about it. She felt like the universe was against her, and she didn't know what else to say. I will tell you that when Donald Trump uses this word, it's hiding a feeling of weakness as well. So it's actually, when someone uses the word, gives you a lot of insight into where they're coming from at that moment.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. It really kind of brings the perspective around to show the listeners how being fair is not really a fair thing to do if you are to get the best deal in your business, if you are to be the most effective in your business. Now, I want to take you to one more potential scenario. And that is, let's just say we got someone's attention. Let's just say we got them to get interested in our business opportunity. But now we're saying, okay, so it's just going to be, a $297 setup fee, and then, another $1,000 to qualify for the $1,000 commissions or something. So, and then they tell you something like, you know what, let me think about it. So how would you respond to something like that?
I would say, I had a business person a long time ago that said, treat every maybe as if it's a no. And so let me think about it as a maybe. And what you do to tease out more information is now you've got someone who doesn't want to answer questions. They're in what we call avoider mode. And they're trying to exit, but there's still some ambivalence there. So that's when you come in with this tool called labels. And you say something to the effect of, sounds like that's a no. That's a gentle way of bringing them back to their decision and having them decide whether or not it really is a no. Now, the crazy thing about that is, no one wants to say yes to that, because yes is a word that people are afraid of, because yes is commitment and no is protection. And when the psychological dynamics, again, it's emotional intelligence on steroids. This is why hostage negotiators understand emotional intelligence. It's easier to say no because no is protection. It's harder to say yes because yes is commitment. So when you say sounds like that's a no, they're more likely to respond with no because they feel protected in the moment. And that begins to draw it out. So then a follow-up is another label, which would be, sounds to me like what you're going to lose is just not worth it. Again, you're getting at someone's loss. What you want to ultimately get at is, what do they lose if they don't do this? What's the loss they're trying to avoid? And you're trying to tease them back to that, gently walk them back to that slowly but surely. And what you also need to know is this a lost cause? So if someone says, let me get back to you, what you really need, your most valuable commodity is time. If you're really wasting your time with this person, you need to stop wasting your time and move on to the next person. So if someone says yes to that question, you've done everything you possibly can do to land that sale. And you're now leaving that individual in a positive frame of mind with a lot of respect for their position. And you're moving on, which then actually leaves a seed for the next interaction. But you do need to know when to move on, and that's how you find out whether or not to move on.
Wow. So guys, just to kind of recap, when you got someone telling you a maybe, your job is to elicit a no, because people take yes as commitments and no as protection. So, by listening a no, you will then gain more information about why they are saying maybe, and thus have a chance to, get the sale. And if not, and if they say, yep, that's a no, then you're done your job and you're moving on to the next prospect on the list. And you're not wasting your time with somebody who wasn't going to say yes in the first place. So, Chris, thank you very much for that. Now, I do want to mention this before we wrap up. First off, this has been highly educational for me as well, not just for the listeners. I took a ton of notes, and, again, I just want to, go ahead and reread the book one more time because of it. And second, guys, you're listening to this. You've just seen what the kind of knowledge, the kind of expertise, the kind of efficiency you can get by studying Chris's work. Therefore, you are obligated, okay, if you are somebody who wants to profit in your business, somebody who wants to be more convincing in real life, somebody who just wants to win more arguments with their spouse, just go to blackswanltd.com and grab a free chapter out of the Never Split the Difference. And if you like it, and you will like it, trust me, grab the book either on the website or go to Amazon and type in Chris Voss Never Split the Difference, and you'll see it. It's the one with the yellow and red, I think, cover. So, Chris, thank you so much for taking time to sit down with us. Thank you so much for not forcing me, to put a gun to your head to make you show up. I really appreciate it. This has been amazing. And until next time we chat, have a great day.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you for listening to The List Building Lifestyle. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes or Google Play to never miss an episode. Because who knows, just one conversion tactic we share on the show might double your list and double your business. Download the transcript of today's episode and all future episodes at listbuildinglifestyleshow.com. And don't forget to claim your complimentary copy of the Wealthy List Builder Survival Guide at listbuildinglifestyleshow.com/survival. This is Igor Kheifets, and until next time we talk, have a good one.
This is the podcastfactory.com.